I'm Daniel Monaghan. I'm the policy officer here at the Co-operative Party. And this evening's event is going to be on Fair Tax Week, which is the annual event every year, which raises awareness of the importance of fair tax and how we can promote fair tax conduct at home and abroad to ensure we have the funding needed for all our public services going forward. Before I introduce the speakers for this evening, I just want to start with a few tips on how we can make this more interactive. Firstly, for those who are hard of hearing, we're live captioning this event. So if you want to enable those captions, you have to do it yourself by pressing the CC icon on the bottom tools panel of your phone or computer. This Zoom call is also being recorded and it will be featured on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want your image seen, please just come off your video and go to audio only. In order to prevent disruptions, only those who are speaking will have their sound enabled. After we've heard initially from tonight's speakers, we'll hold a Q&A session, and there are two ways you can ask a question. The first is by posting any questions or comments you have in the chat box, and I'll pick them up and provide them to our speakers. And then the second is by raising your virtual hand, and we'll come to you when it's your turn to speak. Finally, just please bear in mind the cooperative values and principles when contributing to make sure everyone feels welcome and included. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our two speakers from this evening. Nora Blausock, who's the Communications Officer at the Fair Tax Foundation, and Councillor Sue Morgan, who's the Executive Member for Resources at Torfaen Council. So I'll go over to yourself first, Nora.
Hi, everyone. Really nice to see you all today. Really happy to be here. We're a week into Fair Tax Week, which has now expanded into about 12 days, but it's all very exciting. I'm going to give a presentation. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Hopefully you'll all be able to see it. Just 1 second. Share. I'm hoping everyone can see that. Great. So I shall start. So here we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Nora Blausock, and I'm here from the Fair Tax Foundation. I'm the Comms and Events Officer. I'm really happy to be here, especially alongside one of our supporter councils, Sue here from Torfaen Council. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about ethical tax and procurement, Fair Tax Week, and what you can do for fair tax in your local area. And a little bit to introduce the Fair Tax Foundation in case you've not heard of us before. We were launched in 2014, and we're a not-for-profit social enterprise. We recognize and celebrate responsible tax conduct and financial transparency. You can see our lovely office there on the slide, right at the heart of Manchester, where much of the co-op movement has started. We're actually in the Cooperatives UK building, which is very nice. We also run Fair Tax Councils, which I will return to in a bit, and Fair Tax Week, which is an annual awareness week celebrating fair tax and the positive impact tax contributions have on society. If you follow us on social media, you already know that we're in the middle of it, and you might even have been to some of our events. But our bread and butter is the Fair Tax Mark accreditation scheme, which helps businesses demonstrate to stakeholders that they are committed to financial transparency and responsible tax conduct. A shocking statistic. Globally, close to 40% of multinational profits, around $1 trillion, are artificially shifted to tax havens each year, leading to a $250 billion reduction in corporate income tax revenue. This just shows why we need to celebrate the good guys who pay their fair share and say what they pay with pride. Our Fair Tax Mark businesses run into some 100 parent companies, 250 distinct distinct trading businesses, everything from small enterprises, co-ops, and multinational corporations. And since the launch of our global multinational business standard, we can now accredit businesses headquartered anywhere in the world. And as you can see on the slide, we have businesses in the UK, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, and hopefully many more countries in the near future. Fair tax mark businesses employ over 250,000 people and contribute more than £1 billion in corporation tax annually. Being a fair tax mark accredited business doesn't just mean paying the right amount of tax in the right place at the right time. It is crucially also about being transparent about who owns and who benefits from the business, as well as how much tax they pay. On the next slide, you can see some of our co-ops. We're very proud of our connection with the co-op movement. Some of the early pioneers, the co-ops were some of the early pioneers of the fair tax movement, and we have a rich history together. In confidence, actually, we're set to announce 2 more businesses that are both co-ops and in the next coming week or coming 2 weeks, which we are very excited about, especially with the Co-op Fortnight coming up. We announced our first multinational co-op, AgroFair, which is headquartered in the Netherlands earlier this year. They are not only co-op pioneers, fair tax pioneers, but also fair trade pioneers, as they pioneered the fair trade banana and were rated ethical consumer best buy. And it's not only businesses, the UK public also cares about fair tax. We launched a new report last week, it feels like a year since last week, last week, in which we show how the UK public is very much a fair tax nation. As you might have heard about it if you're on social media, we've been asking the public the same questions since 2017 and tracking their responses. And this report just brings together the last 7 years and the narrative. And it basically shows that the vast majority of the UK public say they would rather shop with or work for businesses that demonstrate responsible tax conduct, with support at levels that compares favorably to other ethical concerns. There's also a strong desire to see a celebration of those businesses that pay the right amount of tax and who overtly shun the artificial use of tax havens and contrived tax avoidance practices. Just a small fall in support over the last year because of the cost of living crisis, which is understandable, but the desire to encourage and reward good practice remains very strong. So you might have heard of our fair tax councils already. As well as accrediting businesses, we also run the Fair Tax Councils scheme. The Fair Tax Councils commit to leading by example on their own tax conduct and encouraging fair tax practices in their supply chains. 48 councils have so far passed the Councils for Fair Tax Declaration or otherwise shown significant support for fair tax practices, including Torvine, who are so far the only Welsh council we have. And as we speak, there will be a vote going on in a London council, so we could have our 49th council by tomorrow. Watch this space. We've seen a huge surge in the numbers since last summer, and the number has nearly tripled since the start of 2022. A big part of this is our petition we ran with our friends Tax Justice UK last year, which has led to over 18,000 people emailing their councillors to call on them to support fair tax. But the support from the Co-op party has played an equally big part. So for that, we thank you very much. In public, we have to be politically neutral. But here today, I want to recognize what a massive part the Co-op party councillors have played in getting councils for fair tax to where it is now. Of the motions proposed in councils across the UK, over 2/3 have come from Labour and Co-op or Labour councillors, which is amazing. So hats off to Co-op party councillors for this. Thank you so much. And for all the support during Fair Tax Week as well. So what does I don't know if interaction is encouraged, but if anyone fancies it, you could put your hand, virtual hand up if you know that your council is a fair tax council. Does anyone know? I can't actually see anyone. I just realized. I'm gonna see the slides. Anyway, I'm going to carry on. So what does it take to become a fair tax council, and where does the movement come from? We launched the Councils of Fair Tax Declaration in 2019 on the back of research that showed some 17.5% of UK public procurement contracts between 2014 and 19 went to firms with connections to tax havens, which is outrageous. We've taken legal advice on what councils and other public bodies can do within the rules to address both bad and good conduct among supplier businesses. Unfortunately, the legal opinion confirmed what we feared already, is that rules restrict what councils can do to reward supplier businesses doing the right thing on tax in the same way that a social value approach seeks to do, because tax can't straightforwardly be linked to the subject matter of the contract. You might already be aware of this via the Co-op party petition, which is live at the moment. You can see on the social media feed, sign it, about stopping your council tax flowing to tax havens. So the declaration was a pragmatic solution to this problem, based on commitments that councils could make within the rules, doing what they can now and wanting to do more given the opportunity. It's a self-certified process. We don't charge for it. Sample motion is on our website, and so is a template email. If you wanted to email your councillor, you can find a template email on our website in English and in Welsh. By passing a motion, councils commit to good practice in their own affairs and looking at underlying issues relating to fair tax practices. I hope I haven't run out of time yet. I've realized I've got one more slide. And also, oops, have I switched slides? Yes, I'm rushing ahead with my hands. And also encouraging businesses, their suppliers, to do the right thing on tax, as well as supporting Fair Tax Week and calls for reform on public procurement rules. So yes, public procurement is the subject of this webinar. So my next slide. As I mentioned before, we carry out polling every year on public attitudes to tax. In 2023, almost 2/3 of respondents, 64%, agreed that the government and local councils should consider a company's ethics and how they pay their tax, as well as value for money and quality of service, with 19% disagreeing and saying that value for money and quality of service should be the sole considerations. But the government doesn't seem to listen. As you might be aware, the amendments to the public procurement bill were rejected yesterday, including the one put forward by the Labour Party on tax transparency, which could have transformed the UK's ability to ban companies engaged in corruption, fraud, and tax evasion from public procurement, and could have incentivized honest business practices and protected taxpayer money. With the combined value of UK public procurement contracts standing at £300 billion per annum, this could be a massive missed opportunity for taxpayer spend to finally embed tax justice and social value. But the latest I've heard that it is possible that they'll still be working in some of these amendments. So not all hope is lost. And there are some positive aspects to the proposed reforms, not least the intention that overseas suppliers will henceforth have to have their beneficial ownership publicly disclosed, which is a good thing, as UK companies are already required to do. The Fair Tax Foundation is actively engaging with politicians of all political persuasions, not least as many of the Fair Tax Council resolutions that have been passed up and down the country have enjoyed all party support. So to wrap up, this week we want to focus on the positive, because Fair Tax Week is about celebration. We'll be at the Co-op Congress this weekend, Friday and Saturday. So if any of you are there, do come by and have a chat. I'll be on the stall, and our head of comms is going to be on a panel with two of our co-ops, Fair Tax Mark co-ops, the Co-op Group and Third Sector Accountancy. Also our networks manager, Mary Patel, who you might know already, who leads our work on Fair Tax Councils, will be at the Co-op Party Local Government Conference on Saturday. So if you are there, please say hello to her as well. I think that's it from me. Apologies if I went on too long. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Nora. That was great and really informative of all the fantastic work the foundation is doing. Okay, I'll pass over to Sue now to speak to the members. Sue.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me, and apologies, I haven't got a lovely slide set as Nora did, nor was I able to liaise with Nora in advance. So many of the things Nora is saying, you will find echoed in my remarks today. I'm also going to the local government cooperative party event on Saturday. So apologies to those who are coming that they may hear the same thing from me twice as well. But I will try to sort of diverge from the script a little bit in view of some of the things that Nora's interestingly raised. So yes, if you can bear with my little story, which it's a pleasure to be able to share with you. As Torvine, I know it's a really difficult one with the F in the middle, but it's actually Torvine as in grapevine council. So far, and I confidently predict this won't continue to be the case, Wales is only Fair Tax Council. And one of the things that I'm really keen to do in the role that I've got, and I know the leader of the council, Anthony Hunt, is to encourage our fellow Welsh councils to follow suit. So let me tell you a little bit about our journey towards this decision. And again, as a relatively new councillor and cabinet member, much of the credit for this goes to the leader, Anthony Hunt, who on the 25th of January last year proposed a motion to full council entitled Standing Up for Responsible Tax Conduct. And I think if we're thinking in terms of responsible tax conduct, since that point, it's pretty fair to say that the UK government has provided some spectacular examples of irresponsible tax conduct, of which we will be aware. We've seen a chancellor who was careless in his personal tax dealings. I love that word careless, don't you? It just sounds so sort of inconsequential, careless in his personal tax dealings while being the chancellor. And a prime minister who's been closely associated with tax avoidance in his family on a major scale. But, you know, let's be fair. Tory ministers running a country while simultaneously managing massive amounts of personal wealth must find things a bit taxing, and the pun is intended. But I think it's a national scandal that even as early as 2021, around 17.5% of public contracts in the UK were won by companies with links to tax havens. And Nora's updated that information for us now. That position is not getting any better. And the scale of public outrage, I think, is growing. I think just talking to people in the pub and on the streets these days, it doesn't take long, does it, for that conversation to get around to tax avoidance and people's absolute abhorrence of the practice. And they may be thinking in terms of, you know, the Starbucks of this world. But when you deepen the conversation and you talk to them about the scale of tax avoidance and tax evasion that underpins many of the companies that actually provide some of our vital services in this country, And whether or not those services should be run for profit is a discussion for another day. But nonetheless, when you talk to people on the doorstep or in the pub about those webs and networks of funding that underpin some of our public services and how difficult they are to unpick, they are rightly scandalised. And the cost of tax evasion in the UK, well, figures I believe have been a bit difficult to come by since the pandemic. HMRC's last report on the subject, I think, was as far back as June 2019, unless Nora can correct me. But at that point, a very conservative estimate of the total cost of tax avoidance was around 1.7 billion. And that was just tax avoidance. When you put tax evasion in at 4.6 billion, you are looking at, mega bucks. So it's not surprising then that other surveys, for example, the Institute for Business Ethics, have found that tax avoidance and bribery and corruption remain among the most important ethical issues to the British public. Almost 2/3 of the public agree the government and local councils should consider the company's ethics. We've just seen that chart that illustrated it so well. I don't think there's a massive appetite for it being the only criteria for, putting aside value for money. I'll be honest about that. And I think as a cabinet member with responsibility for resources, trying to deliver absolutely vital services in a totally strapped cash environment, it's difficult to imagine an environment where we would have the luxury of that ethical standard which said, even if this is more expensive, if there is any suspicion of tax avoidance, we have to walk away from this company. But I think making sure that it has really serious, significant weighting in those decisions is absolutely vital to public trust. So we have to weigh the value for money argument in the short term against what you lose when you lose public confidence and when companies are seen to rule by the might of the bottom line over issues of ethics and standards. So, as I said, digressing from my script, one thing I did want to stress was that paying tax still gets presented as a burden. And I think part of the issue that we are struggling with is encouraging people to see the payment of a fair element of tax, not just by businesses, but by individuals as well, as being part of that deal that comes with being a citizen and expecting good quality services and good quality social safety nets around us. And part of the responsibility and the privilege of that deal, if I can be that naive, is to pay tax and to be a proud taxpayer, to seek to operate, as an individual in an ethical way, will enforce people's views around companies and their ethics. And if people can turn that equation on the head from, if they're getting away with it, why shouldn't I, to I'm not going to go down that route because I'm a better person and I expect better from the companies that certainly serve the public realm. So that issue of paying tax being presented as a burden is something I think is a cultural shift that leadership of the cooperative movement, the Fair Tax Council, and local authorities that are fair tax councils can help with, because tax enables us to provide services from education, health and social care to flood defence, roads, policing. It helps to counter financial inequalities in our society, and it helps to rebalance distorted economies. And a prevailing culture that implicitly applauds tax avoidance and evasions undermines those efforts to establish fairness and social justice, not just in the tax realm, but in all aspects of public life. So that's, having spoken to Anthony and shared his views on this, we're absolutely committed as a council in Torvine to sending that message. And we know that being a fair tax council in itself isn't enough. And we know that there are limitations on what we can do at this point, but we absolutely want that cultural battle to start with us. We want to be the flag bearers for that shift in culture in Wales, and we're really glad that the Fair Tax Mark offers us that opportunity. It gives us a way to gauge the the tax conduct and the willingness to improve the tax conduct of those with whom we contract. When we go out to procurement now, we're asking questions we never asked before about, is your organisation, is your company seeking fair tax accreditation? And if not, is it willing to consider doing so? And that's a test, you know, of the company's sort of moral values. It's not a requirement we can insert into the procurement arrangements at the moment, but by probing and asking questions, we are declaring our values implicitly in that process. And we know that, you know, the mark has already been secured by a huge range of businesses and FTSE listed companies alongside cooperatives and social enterprises. This isn't, you know, restricted to just one sector, and it doesn't indicate you know, organisations that aren't interested in the bottom line sign the declaration, and those that are profitable and successful don't. There are really successful companies that are leading the way in this, and we're telling that message by asking these questions in our procurement. Local authorities receive a huge amount of public funding. Not enough. I'll say that straight away. Local authorities need better funding if we're to continue to champion the cause of the vulnerable and the defenceless, never mind the wider needs of our communities. But we do have a responsibility, because we have so much public money interested, to promote exemplary tax conduct. And by ensuring our contractors are paying their proper share of tax and refusing to countenance working with offshore tax dodgers when buying land or property, or in other ways when we do sometimes get, you know, sort of quite substantial contracts to consider, we can play a really important part. Well, Nora's already stressed that becoming a fair tax council was a lot less onerous than people might think. The fact that it's free in an environment where local authorities are struggling to balance their books might be attractive. The Fair Tax Foundation's approach to encourage rather than to mandate certain actions is really important. Also, the fact that the administrative burden isn't particularly onerous. We aren't required to carry out annual audits of our council's progress at this stage. We're happy to report on it, but we aren't required to. So it's not so scary for those colleagues who are out there, you know, sitting as councillors. It's really okay to let people know in your authority, if they haven't made this step yet, that it isn't a scary prospect. We are resolving to lead by example effectively. We're resolving to do what we should be doing anyway, which is ensure our contractors implement IR 35 robustly and pay their fair share of employment taxes, which is a real big tax dodging area from contracts and contractors, which has been closed, but many still seek to avoid. Not using offshore vehicles for purchase of land and property, due diligence to ensure that not-for-profit structures are not being used inappropriately. And that's one that local authorities do need to watch out for, because it's very easy to set up a not-for-profit structure and it sounds on the surface as though it's low risk and that it's unlikely to be any inappropriate or fraudulent activity, but sometimes they can be a cover. And for me, the biggest challenge we face, and I know I'm running out of time soon, but I really want to stress this, we are struggling, and I'll be honest about this, and I think other councils are struggling too, to identify the ultimate beneficial ownership of many of our suppliers. And I'm thinking specifically around social care here. The network of funding that goes into big companies and big investors who then invest in smaller social care companies, who are then raking off profits in a sector which quite frankly shouldn't be a profit-making sector in my view in the first place, and leaving local authorities having to pick up the bill without any control over whether that additional funding goes to staff at the front line or into the back pockets of some well-heeled offshore investors. And I hate that with a passion. I think this difficulty in getting underneath who owns and who benefits from private investors in public services is something we need to sort out, and with huge urgency, because our social care system is in a massive state of crisis, and tax is not unrelated to that crisis. and tax avoidance is not unrelated to that crisis. So that makes me very passionate for this cause. And it makes me want to promote fair tax certification, Fair Tax Week, speak at events if I'm any help in doing so, and generally just shout from the rooftops that we all have to get aboard this particular train and make sure that it makes progress soon, because it's running along very important rails, which carry other very important policy changes. So we know the current law significantly restricts our ability to penalise or to reward in relation to tax. We know more action is needed, and we absolutely back the Fair Tax Foundation's calls for better and more effective checks on tax issues. And the the UK Procurement Bill / Social Partnership and Public Procurement Bill, which is a mouthful, is a really welcome development in this. It's positive in that it includes grounds for mandatory exclusion in relation to tax for the first time. So we can, for the first time, we can actually say you are out of the process, you know, in relation to but it sets the bar really kind of, do I mean high or low? Basically, you've got to have done something pretty dreadful to hit that threshold for being exempted from the process. But it's a start. It does also allow for the first time us to look at exposing beneficial ownership and requiring it to be made public. Again, it's a tricky, nasty little web, and making sure people are really doing it is a science in itself, but it's there. The central debarment register that's proposed is also an excellent development, because then you've got, you know, ease of looking it up. You don't have to do all that detective work as a little local authority. Torvine, for example, is only sort of a population of 95,000 people or so. So we're small fry as a unitary authority to be doing this on our own. So this is good news, but it's not panacea. The way the rules are written means that many firms will still be able to avoid getting onto any debarment list and still continue to benefit from public contracts. There's a lot more to do. So our declaration is important to us because it talks about how we are going to encourage and shine the light on our contractors, and encouraging our suppliers to seek fair tax accreditation is just part of that. So I said we were on a journey, didn't I? You know, and I always think about Britain's Got Talent, you know, fewer sequins when I talk about us being on a journey. But nonetheless, we are on our way. We're signalling our intent, and we don't pretend it's easy and we haven't got it cracked. But I wanted to end with a quote from Angela Rayner, which is going to be difficult on Saturday because she's on the same platform. She may want to say it herself, but there you go. This is a quote from Angela, which I absolutely think nails it. While the Tories cut murky deals in the dark with their mates using taxpayers' money, Labour, and I would add the Co-operative Party and the Fair Tax Foundation, will tender in the public interest, keep the receipts and publish them out in the open, because the public deserves the truth about their taxes. So yes, sorry if I got a little bit ranty. Politicians tend to do that, but I hope that's been a useful insight into how one little Welsh authority is trying to play its part. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and it's fantastic to hear all the hard work the council's doing on this area, so thank you for that. Okay, I think we'll move on to the Q&A part of the session now. So if anyone would like to pose a question to Nora or Sue, please do put your hand up or drop a comment in the chat box. Would there be anyone who'd like to go first in asking a question?
I think there's some questions in the chat.
Yes, oh yeah, here we go. I'll go first to Kamal, and then we'll bring up the ones from the chat, because there's a few good ones there. So I'll ask Kamal to come in now. Kamal, are you able to come off mute? Okay, no, but while we wait for Kamal, I'll just ask the first couple of questions from the chat. So I suppose this one would be initially for Nora, but happy to have your thoughts as well. So how do we make a windfall tax which would be effective on an organization like Amazon?
Well, if I may answer first, I'm not sure about the windfall tax, but there are some very positive things happening over down under in Australia. I don't know if anyone here has heard about public country by country reporting. This is about to go into legislation if all goes well. There's lots of powerful forces trying to stop it in Australia, which means that multinational companies will be legally obliged to publish their profits in every country where they operate. This means that Amazon will have to publish their profits not just in Australia, but in every other country where it operates. And there's movements in the UK as well where we're pushing for the same thing to be put into law in the UK. So hopefully by pushing this legislation through companies like Amazon, we can shine a light on what they're doing, and they can no longer hide away their practices. And I think this is the first step towards improving things in terms of tax avoidance. And we're pushing for this at the moment. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to what was the word, trap them, but hopefully we can achieve meaningful change through this legislation, and that will start to make them do right eventually. Although I don't know if you count me as naive or optimistic. Let's say optimistic. I think that's my answer. Maybe Sue wants to come in as well.
Yeah, not that I've got anything massively insightful to add, but just a few thoughts. I suspect that the rest of the world is watching carefully to see what a big multinational like Amazon's reaction is to that type of attempt to pin them down legislatively. So good on Australia for having a go. I'm pretty sure they're in a position where they could set up their own delivery service, for given that they've got pretty much a whole continent to themselves. That might not be quite so easy in an interconnected zone like Europe, but you know, that will be interesting to see, and good on them. I do think a windfall tax, given that my understanding of windfall taxes is that they're payable where an organization gets a very almost undeserved boost to its profits because of circumstances it neither controlled nor worked for. And I think companies like Amazon really did benefit from the pandemic. You know, no one can argue that that the pandemic didn't make it much more attractive for everybody to stay and watching the TV and to order everything off delivery, because it made everyone safer. So yeah, if there's a windfall tax applicable, you know, because of an energy price surge, I think the pandemic did an awful lot for the profits of companies like Amazon, arguably supermarkets too. And particularly now with the price of food escalating the way it's done, supermarkets' profits have been escalating too. And I think there's a real case for a windfall tax, but pinning it down when the tax reporting system isn't up to scratch yet is going to be the challenge, not the principle of it, but the practice.
Thank you very much, Sue. I'm just going to try again with Kamal. It might be the case, Nora, would you mind asking if you just press the button, ask to unmute for Kamal?
Yes, I'm just trying to find Kamal. The switch views.
Perhaps he...
I can't see him. Or
I've asked Kamal to unmute.
Thank
oh,
you,
great.
Sue.
Oh, I found him now. I've spent a lot of time on Zoom the last week.
Okay. But it doesn't seem like it works, but I'll read out his question. We in Hillingdon, being in opposition, did move the fair tax motion, but the Conservatives didn't let it through. We asked, oh, sorry, I'm trying to see that. We asked them to consider not taking services from Amazon. So quite an important thing there. Once again, Amazon coming up on that side of things. Is there other questions coming in from other attendees?
Just to flag that we do actually have a fair tax mark business headquartered in Germany, but also operating in the UK, who do work, who do public procurement and are an ethical alternative to Amazon. They're called Unite Mercatio. So I think they're very keen to work with councils in the UK, in case anyone, if you go to your council leaders and tell them not to use Amazon, saying at the same time that there is an alternative, then they'll be more likely to listen.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. Just to follow up on Kamal's question, I think he's really asking, what can opposition groups do to try and boost fair tax in their council? Sue, is there any suggestions from yourself, having successfully passed the motion?
I think it's helpful to see the tax issue as part of a wider procurement and social value proposition, because if you're able to demonstrate the social value of local suppliers, it's much easier to influence those local suppliers. So yes, you have to take value in the round, and obviously bottom line is an issue. But when you factor in environmental considerations, job opportunities, the increased sort of social cohesion that comes with local suppliers, then often you can make the figures balance in favour of working with smaller and more known suppliers who you can influence in relation to their tax, and who are far less likely to be investing massive amounts of money in tax evasion and avoidance anyway, just by nature of being smaller and not having those kind of legal and advisory, I say advisory in inverted commas, services that help them find all these loopholes for tax evasion. So I think, the procurement picture as a whole, and ensuring that your local authority is very strong on social value, and opposition parties can do that by continually bringing practical examples of how local firms can add social value, and how ethical and partnership bodies can deliver services that add value in other ways other than simply being cheapest. You will quietly and sometimes without even being particularly detected, move that balance towards the companies that are paying a fair share in tax and are making their contributions to their communities in other ways, on the doorstep too. And the things go hand in hand very often. So I'd say, if you're in opposition and you can't get a fair tax motion passed, don't despair. Keep pushing the importance of social value in procurement as a whole, and you'll achieve similar objectives.
Thank you very much, Sue. I see Brecca would like to come in now, so I'll turn mute.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. I was interested in the point about how it seems within Britain to be a bad thing to pay tax. Now, at national conference, there was somebody who spoke up and said, we are praising ourselves too much, how many members we've got, how much we're doing. We have far much more to do in terms of educating people to think that tax is something that you do as a citizen, and it's a good thing. Now, I remember my father, who's been dead for many years, in Denmark, paying 51% of his income. He was not wealthy in tax. It was not questioned that that was a good thing. So there's something. Has the Cooperative Party produced some resources that can be used by teachers in school within a match context or whatever, where it is discussing tax as a positive thing? Because it intrigues me that there is this, and I think also in Germany, that it's paying tax is not seen quite as negatively as it is here. I mean, Jeremy Hunt now is, in order to get elected again, they're promising tax cuts. I mean, I despair. The country is falling to pieces because there isn't enough money to pay for the social services and whatever that we need. And then they're coming along telling people it's amazing we're going to have tax cut, because there's no justification for it. So does the Co-operative Party do anything in terms of educational resources? Because it's good enough that we sit and talk to each other and say, oh yeah, we're going to do this, this and the other. But we need to get to the grassroots where the tiddlywinks are and to teach them to get the idea across that you get what you pay for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's an important thing in trying to build up those links with the correct organizations in that area. And I think there's an important place for our councillors who often sit on educational boards and schools and colleges, for them to be able to raise this as well. I think it's a vital thing going forward. Sue, would you like to speak on this issue as well?
Just to say exactly, I mean, in my little rant, I think I said similar things, Brecca, that shifting this notion that tax is a burden and something that, you know, must be lowered to the least possible level is so important for so many reasons. But that sense of active citizenship that takes a pride in supporting those less able to support themselves is going to be a huge shift in culture to try and achieve in the UK, because we've had, I would say this is a Labour councillor, I know, but we've had 13 years of being told that we're unfairly taxed, and that social support networks are used by scroungers and people who shouldn't be benefiting from them. And that message has sunk deep, sadly. I think the pandemic has shown people how untrue that is. I think people have seen real need in their communities up close and personal in a way that perhaps they didn't before the pandemic. So hopefully the value of our support networks and public services has increased in people's minds, but they haven't connected it to a fair level of tax yet. So I think the tide is turning, but we've got to seize it. There's a Shakespearean quote about that, isn't there? Tide in the affairs of men. Yeah. Now's the time to be saying, and these two things are inextricably linked. Yeah.
But my question really was whether the Co-op Party had sort of an education department that enabled resources to produce. So if I'm not longer teaching, but if I could contact the Co-op Party and get some educational resources, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And if you don't have something that you can concretely work with, it's difficult. And the woman who spoke at the beginning of the national conference, she was just making a very strong point that probably of the whole conference was made, but it's fine to say that we need an educational input if we haven't done it. So that is my little plug here. Produce some stuff that people can use, and not just to talk to each other, but to convince people with, and little people, because that's where it starts. Sorry for moaning.
Yeah, no problem at all, Brecca. I think it's a very important point. We don't have that resource at the moment, but I think it is something which we look into. And throughout our policy papers and manifestos and platforms, we do always try and raise awareness of the value of fair tax. But I do think having a kind of one-page document or something like that could be a real valuable resource, particularly for councillors. Sue? Sorry,
just a quick plug for Welsh Government. Welsh Government is working with colleagues in the Co-operative Party and others to enhance the citizenship element of our national curriculum for Wales. So the citizenship element really does explain to pupils and students the importance of taxation and how public services depend on it, how it works together. So again, I would say perhaps that's the best place to influence when you've got a government that is wanting to see the national curriculum and citizenship linked to these important issues, rather than just whether people can recite Shakespeare or not.
Absolutely.
I must move to Wales.
Please do. You'd be welcome.
I see there's a question from Mary as well, asking if the Co-operative Party is doing anything about advocating fair tax. I suppose for individuals rather than just companies. We obviously focus primarily on the corporation tax and the profit shifting which we see. We don't specifically say too much on progressive taxation and tax bans. This has been something which we primarily left to the Labour Party to lead on over the long period of time, really, in terms of individual taxation. But we, of course, promote fair tax and clamping down on things like tax avoidance and tax evasion, and things such as, the schemes people use in tax advisory to move money around and offshore it. So all of those things are important. We do raise that awareness, but specifically about progressive taxation and how and where that should fall, we do primarily leave that to Labour. I hope that answers your question, Mary.
Yes, it would have to be done in conjunction with Labour, or else it wouldn't get anywhere.
Absolutely. So we primarily leave it to their front bench team and policy on that specific area. So we're not contradicting them on what is quite an important issue for them leading up to the next general election. Arlith, would you like to come in?
Can you hear
There you
me?
go. Yes, can hear you now.
I was interested in, I'm just making a comment that you said, someone said, to citizenship and education. All my efforts on that line is that education is given by Parliament and not locally. And to say we can do it in schools, we have to tackle the Parliament that brings the education schedule. And I agree with Mary, education comes down from Parliament into the school. To introduce something to the school is just so difficult. That's my observation as I try to introduce things to the school on changes. They say we can't. It comes down from Parliament. I don't know if anybody had that experience. So that was what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. No, it's an important one, and having that kind of public involvement in education, so it isn't just a top-down system, I think is really important. Mary, I see you would like to ask another question. Would you like to come in?
Yes, I just also to add on that last one, I went to the Progressive Economics Forum at Greenwich, and Greenwich is one of the universities teaching progressive economics, and you had to go into different branches of the meeting, and I sort of accidentally got into the one where they were talking about economics, and although they're progressive, they were talking gobbledygook. You know, I doubt that many MPs have got any idea, you know, what these economists are talking about when they talk about the economy. They make it so complicated. And, you know, I've been following these things for years and years. And some of the time I didn't know what they were talking about. But I got into the wrong into the wrong workshops, I think. But what I wanted to say about LETS, have you heard of LETS? You might be a bit too young to have heard of LETS, local exchange trading schemes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was a community project, which was founded about 1986, and it became very popular in the 90s. And it was about community groups with the members helping each other. And these are not businesses. These are people doing useful things for each other. Could be babysitting, could be cutting the hair, it could be, you know, taking elderly people out for a walk, all sorts of things, which, and to get credits, they have their own sort of mini currency. And I discovered when I went to my local, and they've sort of peaked. They've been taken a bit over by social media. You know, they never really got on to sort of how to manage it, and we've been doing online systems. But at the Islington Co-op Party meeting, I was told that the co-op doesn't agree with them because they're a tax evasion scam. Which is absolute nonsense, because, you know, these are not businesses. These are people doing things for each other and just sort of being given the credit. The idea is that you do something you can do, like you can sweep somebody's floor, and then you can, or babysitting, and then you save up your credits and you can get something that would be really expensive, like therapy, you know, so that you can actually earn something that you couldn't otherwise afford. And you know, if the Co-op Party thinks that, and some of the Let's groups have become behaving very strangely, saying we can't charge the proper rate per hour because we have to, you know, we have to sort of disguise it as volunteering or something, because it's not, you know, because we're afraid, because we've been told it's a tax evasion scam. Now, any views on this?
No, unfortunately for me, I don't know them as a system, so I wouldn't be able to pass
I can write to you separately. I can write to you separately if you like.
Okay, yeah, I'll have a look into that. I'm not sure if Nora or Sue knows anything about them, but if not, I'm just going to move on, just in the interest of time, just to give both Nora and Sue the final chance to wrap up, unless you have any information on Let's and the issue which Mary was raising related to them. So Nora, if you want to go first.
Just wanted to say thank you, everyone, and thank you especially to Sue, and it's great to hear what Torvine is doing. Keep in touch with us and let us know what's happening, and really great to see you all. Just if anyone's interested in exploring beneficial ownership a bit more and who owns a company, we've just done a webinar yesterday, and it should be on our YouTube channel next week, fingers crossed. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nora. I'll come to Sue now.
Yes, thank you, Nora. And I'd like the link to that. That sounds really, really fascinating. So, oh, there you go. That's great. I'm going to click that before I lose it. And we close the event. But yes, I think for me, what's really been great about this opportunity is to see that sort of shared passion for a fairer world, and for a world where people are more engaged and feel more motivated, I suppose, to be proper citizens and to play their part. And I think people tend to assume tax is such a dry, dull subject, there's no point in engaging with it, but it's actually at the heart of those really, really important issues. And I do think the other thing for me is that link between social value and tax that we've talked about. But, you know, Mary, your suggestion around Let's and the exchange of skills and resource, we're exploring a sort of community resilience model in Torvine, which is built on that very principle. It might not monetize it in any way, but that exchange of support and skills between neighbours is what builds cohesive, proud communities. And those kind of communities are proud to be citizens and happy to pay tax. So they are linked. I think it's a false economy to try and get taxation out of a scheme like that. And I don't care whether that's a Labour authority or a Labour government that was saying it. I still think it was a false economy.
It was the Co-op Party. It was someone in the Co-op Party. And
as I said, I mean, some of the legislation does force you down counterintuitive routes, but I think that sounds like a false economy to me, because people have so much to offer each other, and strong communities are in everybody's interest.
The thing is that most people on these schemes, it's peanuts. You know, they're not earning the sort of thing that would come anywhere near a tax bracket. Yeah. So it's kind of making people frightened quite unnecessarily. If you were doing the same thing, if you were running a business, then the rules are that you declare your tax, you know, but it's sort of frightening people about even doing the model at all. saying things like that.
Yeah, and we do have a system where it's catch the tiddlers and let the sharks go free, don't we? So yeah, I think it'd be
Yeah,
really good to
yeah.
revert, catch the sharks and let some of the tiddlers go free. But thank you very much for inviting me. That's my kind of closing little image for the day.
Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you, Nora, for a really interesting and insightful session this evening. And thanks for everyone for joining. Please do keep an eye out for the schedule for Co-op Lives, which will be running through the summer. I hope you all enjoyed this evening's session and wish you all a really good evening. See you soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.